The mouse with the long tail. It is told that once there was a king who had a daughter beautiful beyond words. Marriage proposals came to her from kings and emperors everywhere, but her father refused to give her to anyone, because every night he was awakened by a voice saying,
"Don't marry off your daughter. Don't marry off your daughter."
The poor girl would look at herself in the mirror and ask,
"Why can't I marry, beautiful as I am?"
Nor could she stop worrying about it. One day while they were all at dinner, she asked her father,
"Father, why can't I marry, beautiful as I am? Listen to me. I'm giving you 2 days, and if in that time you don't find someone to betroth me to, I shall kill myself."
"If you put it that way," replied the king, "here's what you have to do. Dress up in your Sunday best, go to the window, and the first passerby will be your husband. And that's that." The daughter obediently went to the window in her Sunday best, and what should come down the street but a small mouse with a tail a mile long that smelled to high heaven. The mouse stopped and studied the king's daughter at the window, and the instant she felt those eyes on her she drew away screaming.
"Father, what have you done to me? The first passerby to look at me turns out to be a mouse. Surely you don't expect me to marry a mouse?"
Her father stood in the center of the room with his arms crossed. "I do indeed, daughter. What I said goes. You must marry the first interested passerby." Without delay he wrote and invited all princes and court grandees to his daughter's gala wedding banquet. With great pomp the guests appeared and took their places at the table. They had all sat down, but the bridegroom was nowhere in sight. Then a scratching was heard on the door, and who should it be but the small mouse with the smelly tail? A lackey in livery opened the door and asked, "What do you want?"
"Announce me,"
said the mouse.
"I'm the mouse who's come to wed the princess."
"The mouse who's come to wed the princess," announced the butler. "Bring him in," said the king. The mouse scampered in, darted across the floor, climbed up the armchair next to the princess's, and sat down. At the sight of the mouse there beside her, the poor maiden turned her head in disgust and shame. But the mouse pretended not to notice, and the more she turned away, the closer he moved to her. The king told the story to all the guests who, in approval of the king's whims, smiled and said, "Yes, indeed, the mouse ought to be the princess's husband." Their smiles gave way to laughter, and they proceeded to laugh right in the mouse's face. Mortified, the mouse took the king aside and said,
"Listen, Majesty, either you warn these people not to make light of me, or suffer the consequences."
He scowled so intensely that the king agreed and, upon their return to the table, ordered everyone to respect the betrothed and cease laughing. The food was brought in, but the mouse, being short and seated in the armchair, didn't reach up to the table. A cushion was placed under him, but that wasn't enough, so he went and sat in the center of the table.
"Any objections?"
he asked, glancing about defiantly. "No, no one objects," the king assured him. But among the guests was a very fastidious lady who could hardly keep quiet at the sight of the mouse poking his mouth into her food and dragging that long, smelly tail over her neighbor's plates. Once the mouse had finished eating her food and turned to that of the other guests, she blurted out,
"How filthy! Who ever saw anything so disgusting? I can't believe my eyes when I see such things at the king's table."
Whiskers bristling, the mouse leveled his muzzle at her, then leapt furiously up and down the table, lashing his tail, lying in the guests' faces, and snapping their beards and wigs. Everything his tail hit disappeared immediately. Soup tureens, fruit bowls, plates, cutlery, and then, one by one, all the guests. The table also disappeared, along with the palace, and all that remained was one vast deserted plain. Finding herself alone and abandoned in the middle of this wasteland, the princess started crying and saying,
"Alas, my mouse, my loathing has changed to longing."
Repeating those words, she set out on foot, with no idea where she was going. She met a hermit, who asked,
"What are you doing out in these wilds, my good maiden? Heaven help you if you meet a lion or an ogress."
Don't speak to me of such things.
said the princess.
All I want is to find my mouse. My loathing has changed to longing.
I don't know what to tell you, my girl.
said the hermit.
Keep on going until you meet a hermit older than I am who might be able to advise you.
She continued on her way, constantly repeating,
Alas, my mouse.
until she met the other hermit, who said,
What you must do is dig a hole in the ground, squeeze into it, then see what happens.
The poor girl removed the hairpin from her hair, having nothing else to dig with, and dug until she made a hole in the ground the size of herself. Then she squeezed into it and came out in a dark and spacious cave,
Whatever this leads to.
she said, and started walking. The cave was full of cobwebs that stuck to her face, and the more of them she brushed off, the more she then found on her. After a day's walk she heard rushing water and found herself on the edge of a large fish pond. She put one foot in the water, but the fish pond was deep. She could not go forward, nor could she turn back, for the hole had closed behind her.
Alas, my mouse. Alas, my mouse.
She repeated. At that, water began rising all around her. There was no escape, so she plunged into the fish pond. When she was underwater, she saw that she was not underwater, but in a large palace. The first room was all in crystal, the second all in velvet, and the third all in sequins. So she wandered from room to room over precious carpets and lighted by glittering lamps, constantly repeating,
Alas, my mouse. My loathing has changed to longing.
She came to a sumptuously laid table and sat down and ate. Then she went into a bedroom, where she got in bed and went to sleep. Then she heard the rustle made by a mouse scampering about. She opened her eyes, but all was dark. She heard the mouse running through the room, climbing up on the bed, slipping under the covers, and all of a sudden he was stroking her face, emitting little squeaks as he did so. She dared not say anything, and remained huddled up in a corner of the bed trembling. The next morning she rose and wandered through the palace again, but still saw no one. That night the table was laid as before, so she ate and went to bed. Once more she heard the mouse running through the room and coming almost up to her face, but she didn't dare say a word. The third night when she heard the rustle, she took heart and said,
Alas, my mouse. My loathing has changed to longing.
Light the lamp.
said a voice. The princess lit a candle, but instead of the mouse she saw a handsome youth.
I am the mouse with the smelly tail.
Said the young man.
To free me from the spell that transformed me, I had to meet a beautiful maiden who would fall in love with me and suffer all that you have suffered.
Imagine the joy of the princess. The couple left the cave immediately and got married. And they lived happily ever after. The end.